Hello, I'm Jyotika. Welcome to Excelling Psychology. In today's class, I'm solving May June 2024 Research Methods Paper 2 for AQA Section C. This lesson is from the AQA UK curriculum, that is the paper I'm referring to, but it is equally helpful to students who are doing the Oxford AQA curriculum because questions, topics for research methods are the same across both curriculi. So definitely both students can benefit from this video. Okay, now as always in this video, I will be writing out sample answers, but at the same time giving you guidance, explaining to you how to approach the questions, how to phrase your answers. So as I write every answer, I will be guiding you also. For those of you who find videos lengthy and feel that you don't want to see so much, I always published a PDF of the answers that I've written on my website and it's available for free download. I always give the link to that web page on my description box and pinned comment below. So please download that PDF from there if you're not interested in watching the full video and you just want the answers. My video is meant to guide you. So the video is for those who need to learn how to write the answers, not for those who only want to know what the answers are. So please keep in mind, yes, the video will be elaborate. Perhaps I will have to break it down into parts. So watch it only if you need guidance. Okay, so I will try my best to complete this in one video, but I don't think it will get done because some of the questions which are there are such that most students find challenging. Like there are questions related to, as you can see, primary, secondary data. Further, there are questions about content analysis. So I would like to explain thoroughly how to answer these type of questions. Okay, so let's begin with the first one. Okay, I'll read out the situation, and the first key thing in answering well is to read the situation carefully, patiently, so that you don't make many mistakes and you don't have to do too many cancellations later. A researcher wanted to investigate the types of play parents engaged in with their children. 10 children and one parent of each child took part in the study. The researcher asked each parent to keep a diary for a month about the types of play their child engaged in. Is the diary primary or secondary data? Justify your answer. It's a simple question. Firstly, if we look at the command term and the marks, which is always the first thing we do, it's for 2 marks. We know we'll have to give 2 points. It is AO2. All research questions are AO2. And the good thing here is they've broken down the question so well that there is no ambiguity regarding what the 2 points have to be. The first point has to simply identify or name that this is primary data or this is secondary data. The second one just has to be reasoning. So they've literally broken down to 2 questions for 2 points. We should not extend more than that. Neither do we have the time to do that, nor are we going to get any credit to write more. Now, one very common mistake students make in these type of questions is for primary and secondary data to identify which type it is, they will simply look at, did the researcher personally collect the data or was the data collected by some other researcher? That is not the definition of primary data. The key defining factor is, has the data been collected for the explicit purpose of this study, or was it collected for the purpose of some other study and it is being used in this one? So what happens is, because students think incorrectly, that's why they assume anytime it is documented, like if it's a diary or something, it has to only be secondary data. But if it is something like a researcher is personally observing something or is interviewing someone, then it is primary data. So this is a very big misconception. Okay, so just clarify that firstly and make sure you know that primary data is the one which is for the aim or the purpose of this study, and secondary data was meant for the purpose of some other study. It's just being borrowed into this study. So this is the way of deciding, is it primary or secondary. In this case, if we revisit the question, clearly it is the researcher who has asked the parents to keep a diary. No doubt the researcher is not directly interviewing the parents, but he's the one who's asked them to maintain the diary for the purpose of this study because he wants to investigate the type of play they do with their children. So definitely it is primary data. One more common mistake is to do with writing style, not writing in paragraphs, like writing primary data hyphen diary was maintained because the researcher said, something like that. Don't give research methods answers in bullet points. That's a very bad strategy. Especially later, we'll see step by step questions. So, putting in bullet points 1, 2, 3, 4. Write complete sentences, complete paragraphs. So, now I'll show you a model answer. Your answer need not match mine exactly, but you can use it as a reference to check whether you are writing along the correct lines or not. I would strongly recommend you pause the video at this point, write your answer, and then check with mine. Active learning is always better than just passively listening to what I'm saying. Okay, so be engaged in the lesson. This is primary data. Okay, so first I'll get 1 mark just for identifying, and then I have to give reason. Which reason I have just explained to you, that only I'm going to put it down in one sentence. The key thing here is to contextualize the answer while writing. Most students will just generally define what primary data is. So after this, they will write primary data is that which is collected for the specific purpose of a research. A stem or a scenario is given to you so that you engage with it, not so that you write an answer independent of that. So, in this context, what is the aim of the researcher? In this context, how did the researcher make sure that the data is according to his aim? That is what you need to write. It should not be a general statement of what primary data is. So, one way of writing this is the researcher asked the parents to maintain a diary so that they could investigate the types of play they engaged in with their children. This suffices, but if you still want to make it more explicit, you can add, put a hyphen or something and add, so it is for the purpose of this study. But the key thing is, don't just write it is for the purpose of the study without talking about what the researcher is doing here. That's the main thing you need to be careful about. So this is one way of writing the answer. The next question is, explain how the researcher could have used content analysis to analyze the parents' diaries. This is a very straightforward question. It's a how question. How, as I've mentioned in many of my previous videos also, just has to be a process, like a step-by-step answer of what should have been done. No analysis at all, no strengths and weaknesses. It's not a why question, it's a how question. It's worth 4 marks, means you have to give 4 steps that could have been done for analysis. And keep the steps in logical order. Some students write very haphazardly. So first thing they'll remember, supposing some sort of this has to be done coding. So first thing they'll put coding without first mentioning anything about identifying key themes. So make sure the steps are going in the correct sequence that they should. Hopefully, for questions like these, content analysis, thematic analysis, or reliability, validity of different types, you have in mind the 4 steps. When I teach my students, I always teach them that definitely these type of questions come for 4 marks. So 4 steps, you should have it like fully learned in your mind, so that in the paper you just have to remember, okay, these are the 4 steps, and you can immediately start contextualizing each step to the scenario. So I hope your 4 steps are ready in your mind for these type of questions. Again, this is something that will run throughout the lesson, so I'm just mentioning it once more. Always contextualize everything that you're writing. That's the only way of getting marks for research methods. So here also, if you generally say following are 4 steps in content analysis and you give definition of each, you're not going to be scoring. You have to keep on relating each step with this situation, which is about types of play and maintaining diaries. So the first step in content analysis is always identifying key themes. Here there is a very strong temptation in students to do that. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, identify key themes. Please don't write like that. Write in complete sentences. So we can say the researcher will first identify key themes in the diary data To make it explicit and to contextualize it, for example, here it could be the types of play, that can be the key theme. What is a key theme? A pattern which is being seen. So here what is going to be the pattern or theme? Which type of play the parent is doing with the child. So types of play engaged in by parents with children. I can give one or two examples such as pretend play. Whatever you've learned in cognition and development, or if you're not doing that in attachment, you must have come across some examples here and there of different types of play you could take from there. So pretend play, constructive play, educational play, informative, any you can give. Examples can be any. It does not have to be like in the situation they haven't given us. So it does not have to be from there. Any example suggesting that you're understanding what possibilities are there in this data. So just be explicit. Next is to code after identifying key themes. So in logical order, that should come next. Then the researcher will identify, so he will code the data systematically by connecting examples, or you can say excerpts of data, to key themes. Again, an example is required to be able to contextualize. So for example, an entry like, say, I was pretending or I was acting as a patient and my daughter acted as if she were my daughter, my doctor, would be classified or would be categorized as pretend play. So here I am giving examples of what types of codes could be there in the data. Once the coding is done, the next thing is to do quantitative analysis. So next, the researcher would tally, or you can say count, the number of instances, or again you could say excerpts or examples, falling under each theme. Again, to give an example, for example, it may be found that, say, pretend play. I'm going on repeating pretend play. It's an easy example. You could take some other example also. Is the most recurring or most common one. Finally, now, final step is quite variable. I have noticed over years of teaching for students from different schools. Generally, for the final step, I take qualitative insights. So, like the researcher could just add more depth by supplementing the quantitative data with some qualitative insights. But some schools insist on no inter-rater reliability only has to be the last step. So you could take that. So first I'll just cover that in case you want to give inter-rater reliability as the last step. In that case, you could just suggest that independent coders would be marking all the data, then they cross check with each other and try to obtain a correlation coefficient of plus 0.8 or greater. So you could end off that way as your last step. Some would suggest, because this is in a very popular textbook, that further validation of themes could be done by procuring more data along the same lines, like say more diaries or reports of parents playing with their children, and seeing whether the same codes could be applied to that data as well. Again, a good way of ending. So those two possibilities are also there. I just wanted to know those are correct if your school is asking for those. But usually I end off this way, so I'm taking my preference here. Qualitative insights could be provided into the data by giving some examples of, for example, how parents and children communicate during their interactive play, etc. So here I'm just trying to suggest that some depth can be given to the data by, besides mentioning the count of like which is the most common type of play, also giving a few examples of exactly what parents and children speak to each other during this type of play. Other examples could be by noting the emotional tone that they have while playing, or in which context they tend to show these type of plays, or where they show which type of play. Those examples also you could give. So this would be my answer for a 4 marks content analysis. The underlined points are the key steps that I have given for this answer. Let's look at the next question. Okay, now here the question is, the researcher was concerned about reliability of content analysis. So how might they have assessed the reliability? If you've already given it as the last step in the previous answer, that's no issue, because there you've given it as one step. Here you can give it in much more detail. So that's fine if it's overlapping a little with the previous. That's not an issue right now, but I'm taking it from scratch because I haven't mentioned anything about reliability in the previous. This is also how question. This is also worth 4 marks. So again, I hope you know the 4 steps for talking about reliability, like they're there in your mind as a framework and you're able to just apply them to the context. For content analysis, ideally we should take inter-rater reliability, though I know even retest reliability is possible. If you're taking that one, make sure you can cover it correctly. The insistence has to be on same coding system with same parents and children on a different record. So if you're able to explain that correctly, then only take it. It's a little extensive, so I won't be able to explain right now. I'm just taking the most straightforward one, which is inter-rater reliability. In inter-rater reliability, the first step is to develop a mutually agreed upon coding system. So I'm going to start from there. The researchers will first prepare a standardized coding system. For example, again I'm taking from pretend play, your example could be different. Any instance of play suggesting the parent and child enacting different roles would be categorized as role play. I'm sorry, my keyboard is acting up a little. Okay, also you can think of this as operationalization. Standardizing the codes means operationalizing or defining what will count under what. So I've just given one instance of that. Again, contextualization is key. So that's why you can see I'm giving explicit examples. I'm not just mentioning, okay, this is step 1, step 2, step 3. That way we don't score. Next. Okay, I haven't specified how many researchers, so here I'll specify 2 researchers. You can suggest more than this. Will independently code the same diary data using this coding system. Okay, here I have nothing to link back to. I've mentioned diary data. That is my contextualization. Like there's no specific example to give here because it's continuing off the same example in the previous point. Next thing is, after they are independently coding, they need to tally or cross check with each other. Next, they will cross validate their coding against each other. For what? Here we have to mention to what. That is what we can contextualize. Many students, these type of answers, they write very incomplete sentences. So make sure every point is very clear. So this is what the researcher is doing, with what or for what. That should always be there. So they will cross-validate their coding against each others to check for similarities of frequencies noted for each type of play. Why are the researchers cross-checking their checklists like coding systems? To see whether both have categorized the same type of plays as occurring as frequently as the other. That's why. So again, this is how we are linking it. And I forgot to mention, actually, I should have in the beginning, like, to establish inter-rater reliability. I should have started that way. It's okay, now I've not written, so I won't add it there. I'll put it in the last point. Whenever we finish off a reliability point, it must end with calculation of correlation coefficient. This is where most students falter. They will write up till here, what I've written, that they'll cross-check their lists with each other and they just leave it there. But then how are they coming to a conclusion that reliability is there or not? They are assessing the reliability after all. So they cross-check with each other, then what? Do they just, like, no matter how much it is matching, they just say, okay, it's reliable? Of course not. They establish a correlation coefficient to understand whether it is reliable or not. So that point has to be there. Now, some students memorize to the extent that kappa should come to plus 0.87 good. Otherwise, again, in the most popular textbook, which is there, plus 0.8 has been set off like as a cutoff of good or excellent reliability. I will stick to that for now, so we can propose that. Like, they should find that much of a coefficient to say that data is reliable. So we can say finally, they will calculate a correlation coefficient for the frequencies obtained by each researcher, and instead of just saying strong positive, I'll actually specify that cutoff plus 0.8. And if it turns out to be plus 0.80 or greater, it will be considered that the analysis has good or high inter-rater reliability. So as I mentioned earlier, I forgot to name exactly the reliability. I've specified it here. Okay, so what are my 4 steps in writing? Development of a structured coding system. Next, independent coding. Next, cross validation against each other. And finally, calculating the correlation coefficient. That last step is pretty much something you can memorize. There's nothing to contextualize in that because it's kept in that manner only, like no matter what the situation is. So you can always apply it to any situation. Like I said, an alternative for this is to give test-retest reliability if you can explain it well. This is generally the one which is found easier by students. Else, else what you can do is, like, I'm thinking of what other possible steps are there. Generally, just stick to these steps. Otherwise, some of you might have learned about piloting the categories before doing the actual coding. You can have a point on piloting as your first point. And yes, like I said, you can mention the last point, Cohen's kappa, for calculation of inter-rater reliability. That's a good point to give. Those are the only other possibilities I can think of right now. If the screen answers are becoming difficult for you to read, sometimes I forget to zoom in, zoom out, or turn up the screen on time. In that case, like I mentioned, please download the PDF of the answers and keep referring to that. Let's look at the next question. I'll just keep it a little zoomed out, so I think then we can see more clearly. The researcher decided to interview some of the parents about the child's play. Explain why data collected from the interview might have improved upon the data collected from the diaries. For these type of questions, like why one method is better than the other, there are 2 possible approaches you can take to answer. One is the depth approach, second is the breadth approach. If you take a depth approach, which I usually do, you will take one strength of an interview against maintaining a diary. It should not be independent of maintaining a diary. It has to be something that's better than maintaining a diary. And then you can just give detailed examples to justify 3 marks. Alternatively, you can take a breadth approach and you can give 3 different strengths of an interview versus a diary, and for each strength you can just give 1 line instead of elaborating on each. Normally I take a depth approach, as you can see in my previous video, so today I'll take a breadth approach just to show you something different. And once I've done with that, I'll give you one example of how you could take one of the points for a depth approach as well. First thing that will come to mind is interview data is definitely more detailed than what is mentioned on diaries. And that is added to upon by the fact that follow-up questions can be asked. So what we can say is an interview will enable researchers to gather more depth about type of play, again keep contextualizing, by asking follow-up questions to get more context, which would not be possible with diary extracts. Also, I think I've mentioned this many times before. When there is a comparison type of questions, like diary, how it's better than, so interview, how it's better than diary, keep implying how this is better than this possible weakness that would have been there in the diary. Like, don't not mention the diary at all. Make sure you keep on referring to the diary and show that this is how it's better than a diary. So always keep that tone throughout the answer. So whereas the diary would be limited, the interview will be detailed. That is my first point. Secondly, because I'm taking a breath approach, I'm going to give two more. If there is ambiguity in being able to classify any instance of play into a particular category, it can be resolved by probing further during the interview. Again, probing is not possible with an already recorded diary. So this is about solving ambiguities with the help of diaries. So with the help of interview, that's my second point. Finally, when it comes to interview, it's real-time conversation. It's a conversation between two people which encourages the other person to reveal more, as against a diary which is more like one-sided communication. So that is one more point I would take. Finally, interviews can encourage parents to provide more details about how they play with their children due to real-time interaction with the interviewer, which would not be available in one-sided communication with the diary. Okay, so these are my 3 points, like 3 advantages of interview over diary is: firstly, more depth; secondly, resolving ambiguities is possible; and third is motivation of parents because they are directly interacting with the researcher, which allows them to reveal more. Now, if I wanted to take a depth approach, I would take any one point, let's say the first one. I can just give further examples to like illustrate this point. So when I'm saying that more depth about types of play, I could just say that, for example, if again let's take, okay, this time let's take educational play. So if educational play was being seen in which a parent is asking a child to say name different types of objects, like a puzzle or a riddle game, they are playing with the child, holding up different objects, asking the child to name them so that the child can get educated about different types of objects. So in a diary, they might only specify that this is the activity they were doing, whereas in an interview, we could ask them to explicitly name exactly which objects they were holding up for the child, why those objects only, what did they want their child to learn during that play session. Those type of details we can give. So this would be the objectives of the parents that we could discover, or these would be the specific objects they were using which we could discover by asking them. So in this way, you could write 1 point for 3 marks by giving such specific examples, which is what I usually do. But here I just wanted to show you a different approach. Let's look at the next question. In the interview, the researcher collected some qualitative data. Write one question that could be used in the researcher's interview that would produce qualitative data. Okay, it's worth 2 marks. Make sure to give an elaborate question. The most common mistake here is to write an indirect speech instead of direct quotes. The researcher could have asked about how the parents interact with the child, something like that. That's not the way of writing. You put in direct quotes and with direct language, what we say, second person. You write the question directly. Like this is the exact question which the researcher would be asking. So don't make that mistake. Second is to write a very generic type of question. That is also one problem. The interviewer will ask, do you do pretend play with your child? Do you engage in educational play with your child? That's too broad. Always revisit the aim of the study. I will strongly recommend when it comes to these type of questions. What does the researcher want to see? The types of play parents engage in with their children, right? So ask something about, and also we should read a little further. Like he asked them to maintain a diary for the month, so he wanted to know, like, for a long time what type of play they're engaging in. Keeping all this in mind, make the wording such that is relevant to all the details given in the question. Also, before I phrase the question, open questions need to begin with describe, explain, elaborate, or why, how. So make sure your questions along those lines. Don't write closed questions. Some students, they believe only if they don't give response alternatives, then it is a open question. Supposing I ask someone, how often do you play, say pretend play with your children? Now I see this is an open question because I'm not giving response choices. So I'm not saying things like once a week, twice a week, or something. It's still a closed question because even if you're not giving response alternatives, how often, how many, suggest to the other person that they should give a definite number, and that's all, that they shouldn't elaborate more. So it still qualifies as a closed question because there is an implicit suggestion that they are not to elaborate more. So make sure you don't write those type of questions. Okay, I don't want to discuss that further. It'll come too elaborate. So let's come to what we can write. Like I said, we should put the question in closed quotes. Can you describe? Now many students will argue, can you is closed. I'm asking, can you describe? I'm asking them to describe. Instead of saying describe, I'm just putting it in a polite way. But the opening is with describe only. So it's an open question. So can you please describe a particular moment during playtime with your child that stands out to you, and please explain why it is meaningful. Right? So here it is an open question with reference to what does the researcher want to know about. It's exactly about that engagement of the parent and child. So some moment in which they felt particularly engaged with the child. And because it's an open question, explain. So we want them to give many details about why that moment stands out for them. Other possibilities, yes, you can ask about specific types of play, just make sure not to ask closed questions. So instead of this, say, you could also ask, please explain which type of play you particularly enjoy engaging in with your child. Or please elaborate on the meaningfulness of so and so type of play with your child. Those type of questions can also be there, as long as you give in quotes, as long as it's an open question, and as long as it is relevant to the study. Okay, let's look at the next question. Identify one limitation of qualitative data. This is 1 mark, and identify means just name. You can literally just give in a few words. You don't even have to give a full sentence. This is a very straightforward question, like the most straightforward question possible. You just have to name one weakness. Just to brainstorm on all the weaknesses possible. It is not objective, it's subjective. That's the first thing which will come to mind. It's subject to researcher bias. Other possibilities are it can be difficult to analyze, so statistical analysis is not possible. Otherwise, it can be misinterpreted by participants, although that is true for quantitative questions also, because it's more about the questions rather than the data. But yes, you can take it that way, that open questions tend to be misinterpreted further. because they have broad wording. And generally for qualitative data, we use open questions. That requires some amount of explanation. So right now I feel subjectivity is the best answer. Like we can give it straight off. You can just simply write subjectivity or subjective bias, or you can write one sentence like I'm writing. One limitation is possible subjectivity in interpretation. The word bias is also correct. You can substitute the word subjectivity with bias. Even researcher bias is correct because here we are talking about the researcher's interpretation. Okay, let's look at the next question. The researcher noticed age-related differences in the types of play mentioned in the diary entries. They designed an experiment to investigate the differences in play choices between 2-year-old and 4-year-old children. The researcher carried out the study using children from two local nursery schools. There were 30 children of each group at nursery A. There were 20 children of each group at nursery B. All parents gave informed consent for their children to take part in the study. The researcher used stratified sampling of the nurseries. Okay, so we know they're going to ask something about informed consent and stratified sampling because they're very explicitly mentioned. Do active reading, keep on noting in mind what is there, it helps you to write. Also very specific about samples. So 10 2-year-olds and 10 4-year-olds took part in the study. Each child was observed for 15 minutes during playtime in an area of the nursery where they could choose to play with building blocks, a sandpit and a slide. So questions are going to be there about all of this. The researcher recorded how long each child spent playing with each activity. Explain how the researcher could have obtained informed consent from the parents for this study. Okay, many people are startled. I remember last year because how can informed consent question come for 4 marks? We expect it to come for 1 or 2 marks. So that's why, like I told you in the beginning, you have to be ready. So that's what we do in our class. We always keep it ready, like 4 points for any how type of question. So hopefully you also have your 4 points ready and you just have to contextualize them. I have nothing more to say about how to interpret these questions. It's similar to the other how questions which we did. Only one thing came to my mind while reading is you can see like how they use the continuous scenario always. What's there in the beginning is there now also. That's why also reading the scenario carefully is so important because the same scenario is running throughout. So if you have a good understanding of the first part, the other parts become easy to grasp and becomes easier to write the answer. Okay. The first step when it comes to informed consent is to give a consent form to somebody, right? So the researchers would first provide a detailed consent form to the parents, including purpose of the study, uh, that is differences in play choices between age groups, etc. Sorry, one more example we'll give. Uh, what participation involves, such as 15-minute observation of child's playtime in the nursery. So I've given the point and then I've given examples to contextualize the point. Other possibilities, you could say confidentiality, could be assured that children's names won't be given, codes will be written, or voluntary participation that parents can withdraw at any time. The key thing here, I remember when this question came up, the issue was many students, they have this thing that the questions are being asked from the following part of the scenario, like the part which they've given later. Still, they keep on referring to the first part only. So when they talk about the consent form and the purpose of the study, they say it's about writing diaries. This is a follow-up experiment that the researcher is doing. It's no longer about the diaries. Now it is about age-related differences. So don't make that mistake. To contextualize, don't give examples from the first part of the situation. They're asking you from the second part. You have to link to that part only. Okay, so first is doing a detailed consent form. Then what do we do for informed consent? we make sure that participants fully understand the purpose. Then they would assure that the parents understand the purpose, the information, not only the purpose, the full information, by asking them a few questions. Okay, there's nothing to contextualize here, it's following the first example only. Then we can talk about the method of consent, how consent will be taken, like online, in person, that depends on you. So we can say uh, parents will be required to sign the form on paper, and again to contextualize, the nurseries will mail the papers to them and submit their returns to the researchers. Okay, and then what is left is we can talk about ethical reiteration, in the sense that even after consent is given, they are allowed to withdraw their children. So that is something that will be reiterated. So once they've submitted the form, also they will be reminded, like the nursery, whoever is contacting them to request the form to be returned will remind them that though they have signed the consent form, they are free to withdraw their child at any time. So finally, it will be reiterated to the parents. Like, we are just trying to show you that they know that this is not hard binding on them. This is not like an obligation that they have to only satisfy the consent no matter what. So it will be reiterated to the parents by the nursery staff that they can withdraw their child at any time, even after giving consent. Right? Another possibility of answering this question, I won't get into much details, is to focus only on the consent form. Lots of students do that. This will be on the consent form and they have to sign. I don't prefer that approach because I feel it's more of a process of taking consent. So it should be like these 4 steps. But that's also fine. Like, you can just mention what all should be on the form and then just say that, they have to sign it. Okay, this is the last question I'll be able to take today. So let's go through it quickly. Identify the type of experiment used in the study, justify your answer. 1 mark for identification, it's clear, and 2 marks for justifying. So any 2 features, or especially the defining features, we can bring about of that type of experiment to justify. It is a quasi experiment. You could also call it natural. I would call it quasi because they are comparing age groups, and age groups is something you cannot manipulate in the laboratory, right? So it has to be quasi experiment. So first we just name it directly to answer the first part of the question. As I said, you can call it a natural experiment. There's a very thin line differentiating the two. This classifies for both. These are naturally occurring groups. Now, how to justify? It is pre-existing. It is not manipulated. That is the justification. Like, that's the defining feature. If you want to only add one more thing, you can say random allocation is not possible. So how I would put it is, of course, contextualizing, naming the groups. Pre-existing groups of, what is that, 2-year-old and 4-year-old children are compared without any manipulation of the independent variable of age. Randomization is also not possible given that these age groups are fixed. Right? If you're taking it as a natural experiment, a very good point I would say is to specify that it's in the natural nursery environment. Like, that can make it a second defining feature if you say natural experiment instead of quasi experiment. Some other day, some other lesson, I'll explain the difference between the two. right now it's beyond the scope of this lesson. Also, I'm not able to cover the further questions for this one in this video, so I'll make a part 2. Take this as part 1, and how much I have done here, I'll upload that much onto my website and link it below. After the second part, I'll complete the whole document and link it to my website. I know exams are coming close, so right now I'm uploading one part also. So I just have to leave in a rush for now. If you have any doubts, questions, suggestions about this video, please leave them in the comments box below. And if you're looking for psychology tuition from me, I'll leave my contact number and email ID in the description box and pinned comment below. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.